Hey guys, Michael Hyatt here. Welcome to the January coaching session. I am so pumped about these sessions because this year we're going to be doing them live using Facebook Live. They will automatically be recorded. And if you're watching this in a replay at any time, you can skip ahead from the pre-show. We'll do the pre-show every time where we'll just banter a little bit and give people a chance to get on before we go further. So I hope you're ready for this session because it's going to be, I think, really awesome. All right, and we're back. Get on Michael Hyatt, the creator of 5 Days to Your Best Year Ever. And today, I want to talk about the topic of activation triggers. This is a simple formula for achieving your goals. This, for me, has been a game changer, and it's something I kind of got into as I was doing some research on goal setting about something that the goal researchers call implementation intentions. And that means that one of the best ways that you can accomplish a goal is to set yourself up for success. There's some things that you can do to set yourself up for success and to anticipate, this is key, the obstacles and the roadblocks that you may face in the process of pursuing your goal. So we're going to be talking about activation triggers, and here's how it's going to work. I'm going to teach here for, 10 or 15 minutes, however long it takes. I don't really know because this is the first time I've done it. But I'm going to teach on this topic for a few minutes, and then I'm going to take your questions. And I'd love for you, if you've got any questions about activation triggers, to go ahead and put those in as they occur, and I'll try to scroll back and I'll hit your questions. But I really do want to coach you. I want this to be an opportunity. If you've got a goal and you're stumped and you need some help, I'm here to help. If you've got the idea of an activation trigger and you want to attach an activation trigger to a particular goal, specifically habit goals, I want to coach you through that. I'm going to give you lots of examples in this session, but we're going to give you some real practical advice. And I kept thinking through, what do I want to cover in this first session? Because January is like one of the most important months of the year. It's important to get off to the right foot. So I thought about going a little bit deeper on habit goals. I thought about talking about motivation. I thought about talking about some apps that would help you, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And I just kind of came to the conclusion that the best thing I could do would be to talk about activation triggers, because they've been such a huge help to me and such a game changer for me. And some of my private coaching clients, we've been using these, and it just takes the pain out of getting consistent on a goal. And here's the deal. You've only got a certain amount of willpower. In other words, you've got a certain amount of willpower every day, and every time you use your willpower to do something, you use up energy. So let's say that you're decided that this first of this year, you're going to exercise, and that would be a great goal for this year. And you've got something very specific. Let's just say that your goal is that you want to exercise 3 times a week, and you want to spend 30 minutes per exercise session doing something that gets your heart rate up. Okay, so you got a lot of motivation in January. And I see this at the gym. Every time I go 5 days a week, and every time I go, I see the gym full. I call those people the resolutionists because they're the New Year's resolution people. And they're still there, but they're going to be gone in a couple weeks because they will have run out of willpower. They had a lot of motivation at the beginning, but they couldn't keep it going. And it's because they didn't make use of an activation trigger. Actually, more importantly than that, they probably didn't have a clearly defined goal, and they didn't connect with their key motivations, but they also didn't have an activation trigger. So several years ago, I was trying to get consistent with running. And I found that when I started, I was excited because I had new shoes, I had new clothes, and that's half the fun, right? Kind of developing the mindset of a runner. I got myself a Garmin watch, so I was going to track my speed and my distance and all that. And it was really easy at first. But then I found it was much more difficult as time went on to actually lace up my shoes and get outside and actually run. Sort of the willpower ran out of it. Now, connecting with your why is important, but an activation trigger that I stumbled upon was even more helpful in getting me consistent, because that's a real challenge with habit goals especially, is consistency. And so what I did, and this sounds like ridiculously simple. When I say this, I promise, here's what you're going to say. You're going to go, That's all? I mean, that's all there is to it? Yeah, but I'm going to give you some examples of how this can really, really be powerful. So what I did was I set out all my running clothes the night before. So I've got a little bench in my bathroom, and that's the first place I go, naturally, when I wake up, and there were all my running clothes. So it made it easy. I didn't have to exert my willpower to decide if I was going to go running. I already decided the night before, and there are my running clothes. All I've got to do is put them on. And so we're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of activation triggers and a lot of ways to do this, but I'm going to basically break this down into 4 steps. So step number 1 is start with a clearly stated goal. Now, this could be an achievement goal or it could be a habit goal, either one. And I'm going to give you some examples here in just a minute. And let me just check my notes here. Yep. Okay, good. We're all good. So the best goals, as you guys know from the course, whether you were at the live event or whether you've gone through the actual video material, the best goals are smarter goals. Now, habit goals have a little bit of a twist on this, and I'm going to be writing and coaching you more on this probably next month. I just developed a whole lesson on this this morning that I'm pretty pumped about. But the best goals are, first of all, specific enough, right, to focus and direct your energy. So they can't be broad. They've got to be specific. And by the way, you can go to session 3 in the Best Year Ever course if you have any questions about this. Best goals are measurable. In other words, you can keep track of your progress because you've quantified with a number or with a percentage that goal. And then they're actionable. They have a clear initiating verb that prompts a specific activity. They've got to start with an action verb. They're also risky. That's the R. Risky enough so that they leverage our natural tendency to rise to a challenge. If they're not risky enough, they're going to be forgettable. They're not going to be compelling enough for you to keep going, especially when the going gets tough. They've also got to be time keyed so that you're prompted as to exactly when to act or when the deadline is, especially in the case of achievement goals. And then they got to be exciting. This is the E, exciting enough to inspire and harness the power of intrinsic motivation. By the way, I did get this question in one of the Facebook posts the other day. Somebody said, and I can't remember who it is, so forgive me if this was you, but they said, I really want to get my books reconciled, my accounting books reconciled by March the 1st, but I'm having trouble just getting any energy or motivation around that. And I said, so you're not excited about it, right? Right. Okay, so that's not really a goal. That may be a project, but that's not a goal. Because by definition, a goal has to be exciting. Now, it may not be hugely exciting, but it's got to be exciting. And there's a difference between a project and a goal. So every goal is a project, but not every project is a goal. That's a key distinction. So you want to have a clear goal that's exciting to you. That's what makes it a goal. And then also finally, relevant. It's got to be relevant to the overall context of your life. It's got to be aligned with your other values. It's got to be relevant to the season of life that you're in and all that. So start with a clearly stated goal. And that brings us to point number 2. And that's this: brainstorm possible triggers. Okay, this is where it gets fun. So I want to give you an example here, and you want to make sure that the goal meets the SMARTER standard, obviously, and then you want to identify a trigger, like the example I just gave, that sets you up for success. Now, let me just give you a short list of possible triggers for different scenarios. So, for example, I have a trigger. I'm in my office right here. The lights behind me are programmed to go off automatically at 6 p.m., so I follow through on my goal of quitting work at 6 p.m. because I really want to be present with my wife, with my kids when they're over, or my grandkids. And this is just a reminder, the lights go out, and that's just a activation trigger that I need to stop, and I need to go in the other room. It works like a charm. Here's another one. One of my goals for this year is to get back to the practice. This is a habit goal of having a date night with Gail. So I ask my assistant to automatically get dinner reservations for me each Friday night at 6 p.m. So I follow through on my goal of a weekly date night. Does that make sense? So that's just a simple activation trigger. So I don't even have to think about it, because what was happening to me in the past is about Friday afternoon, I would think about it. And I know in our in our part of the city, it's really hard to get reservations that late. And then so I'd be tempted to blow it off, or do I try to, find a place to go so I can take Gail out to a nice dinner and we can have a meaningful conversation? And so I said, forget that. I'm going to have Jim, my assistant, figure this out. Now it's his responsibility. So when I get to Friday afternoon, I don't even have to think about it. All I need to know is where the restaurant is. I've got reservations and I'm going to show up. Here's another one. Hire a fitness trainer to work with me on strength training so I follow through on my goal of strength training Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I did this 3 years ago. That's worked beautifully too. I could not get any momentum around strength training until I hired a trainer, and that made all the difference. Here's another one. Throw out all processed food from my refrigerator and pantry so that I follow through on my goal to eat only clean, whole, organic foods. So that was one I did several years ago. And that way, I didn't have to exert my willpower every time I went to the pantry. So I didn't have to say, oh yeah, I can't eat that because it's processed food, or I can't eat that because it's sugar. If it's not in there, it takes zero willpower, and I can use my willpower for other things other than these habits. Here's another one. Have my assistant book appointments to interview authors so I follow through on my goal to read one book per week. Now, I got to explain this. So I'm starting a weekly television show, a live show on Monday nights at 7 p.m. in the middle of February. And the idea is that I'm going to be interviewing an author, different author every week on a book that I've found to be really important to me. What that means is that part of the show prep, I got to read the book. I can't show up and talk to an author about his book without having read the book. So I got to read the book. So that's a way that I can create an activation trigger that absolutely guarantees I'm going to read that book, because I don't want to show up and be embarrassed with the author in front of the whole wide world. Here's another one. You've probably done this one, but if you haven't, this is a great way. If you've got a savings goal, set up an automatic deposit to your savings account so you follow through on your goal to save a certain amount of money. Here's another one I did, and this is the last one I'm going to give you as an example, but that is take my laptop out of the house so I'm not tempted to work after supper, and so I'm committed to having this off-stage time and spending time with Gail in the evenings. And what I found was, and this is sneaky how this works, is I have this iMac that I'm looking at right now, which is in my office, which I work on all day long, but then I had a laptop in the house. And so what would happen is that I would go into the house, we'd eat dinner, and then I'd think, well, I'm just going to jump back on and see if anybody's communicated with me on Slack or email, and then I would get sucked into the vortex of the internet. You know how that works. And so every night I'd have to exercise willpower to do that. But you know what I did now? See behind me? That's my laptop. I just took it out of the house. It's in my office. It's great for traveling. Otherwise, I don't use it. So that's what an activation trigger is. So you want to brainstorm possible activation triggers in order to come up with some that might work for you, that might set you up for success. Now, what I want to show you now is I want you to optimize your activation trigger, and here's how I want you to do it. I want you to use one of these strategies, either elimination, automation, or delegation. Write that down if you're taking notes. Either elimination, automation, or delegation. Now, for those of you that have taken my Free to Focus course, you know that those are 3 entire lessons in the Free to Focus course. But let me give you some examples here. When you're setting up an activation trigger, you can eliminate temptations that might derail you. So in my examples, I eliminated the processed food in my kitchen and I removed the laptop from my house. Those were elimination strategies for activation triggers. Here's another one. Here's an automation strategy. I automated my activation trigger using technology, and I set up, for example, an automated macro, and it's going to get a little geeky for some of you, to set myself up for my quiet time in the morning so that I wasn't tempted to get sucked into email. No matter how focused I am, no matter how intent I am, that's always a temptation for me until I set up a macro that shuts everything down at the end of the workday and sets up only the programs that I need for my quiet time. In my case, it's my Bible, it's an Evernote file with my prayer list, and it's my daily journal. That's me. That's what I use in my quiet time. Nothing else is open, and it's a hassle to open up everything else, and there's no distraction. And that's an automation strategy. So again, elimination strategy, automation strategy, and finally, a delegation strategy. Now, this is not going to work for all of you, but it will work for those of you that have an assistant. That is, you want to delegate the setup to somebody in your team that can make it easy for you to follow through on your goal or on your habit. So in this case, I use the activation trigger with my assistant. So Jim, as I pointed out earlier, sets up my dinner reservations or books interviews with authors. So again, I don't have to gin up the willpower to try to make that happen. Somebody else does it, something else does it, or I just eliminate it altogether. So again, 3 strategies: elimination, automation, and delegation. Then, 4th step is this. You want to identify obstacles and responses. And this is where the research is really compelling, because the people that have been the most successful in achieving goals, they implemented what the researchers call implementation intentions, which is where you use a simple if-then formula. So if a certain thing happens, you anticipate an obstacle. Well, if that happens, here's what I'm going to do. So let me give you an example. And I did, by the way, cover this in the Best Year Ever live session, this part of activation triggers, and it's this. So I have this goal, a habit goal of leaving the office at 6 p.m. every day so that I can be present with my family in the evening, okay? And so how am I going to handle the possible obstacles that might derail me and keep me from fulfilling that goal? Well, for example, here's one obstacle. I get a phone call at 5:45. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to let it go to voicemail. I'm not going to take a call after 5:45. I've pre-decided, so I'm using my willpower on the front end, but never again. I've pre-decided that if it's after 5:45, I'm not going to take it because I don't want to get caught up in a conversation that's going to bleed into my evening. Here's another one. If a colleague asked to talk on the way out of the office, then I'll tell him I'll be happy to talk tomorrow. I mean, unless it's an emergency, most stuff, 98% of stuff can wait till tomorrow. Here's another one. If I must attend a meeting at 5, if somebody sets up a meeting at 5 and that's the only time we can find, then I'm going to tell the organizer I've got to leave the meeting by 5:55 or in enough time so that I can get home shortly after 6. Here's another one. When email arrives, I'll answer it before 5:30, but I won't check email after 5:45 p.m. Because again, how easy is it to get lost in email and sucked into that vortex so that you're completely lost and time goes away, and before you know it, you look up and you've missed dinner, or you've ticked off your spouse, or you've missed an appointment or something else. So that's how you anticipate or identify the obstacles with a simple if-then formula. If this happens, I'm going to pre-decide how I'm going to deal with it. So again, let me review. Step 1, start with a clearly stated goal. Step 2, brainstorm some success triggers or the best triggers for success. And sometimes you have to work at this a little bit, noodle on it a little bit till you come up with something that's just right. Third, optimize your activation triggers using one of the strategies I gave you, whether it was eliminate or automate or delegate, one of those 3 strategies. And then step 4, anticipate the obstacles or identify the obstacles and determine how you're going to respond. Okay? Now, what I have for you also, let me just see if I can get the right one here. Yeah, I've got a worksheet that I created just for this month. I'm going to try to do this every month. So this is like additional bonus content that wasn't included in the basic course. But I've got this activation trigger worksheet. It's really cool. And in fact, it looks like this. You can actually fill it in online because these are all fill-in fields for, you can see my cursor blinking there. But those are fill-in fields. So if you want to type it and actually do this on your computer in Adobe Reader or inside of Preview if you're on a Mac. But that's what the worksheet looks like, or you can print it out and just handwrite it. You know, to be honest, that's probably what I would do. But you can download that. Whoops, wrong key. You can download that. Where is it here? Let me get back to here. And you can download it. Right? That's not it either. Be patient with me. Download the free worksheet here. bestyearever.me/triggers. bestyearever.me/triggers. And if you want to read the original blog post, you can read that one here at michaelhyatt.com/triggers. All righty. So what I want to do is take your questions about activation triggers, and I'm just going to refresh my page here. Man, tons of questions. And I'm going to try to answer what you have regarding activation triggers, and I'm going to get to the questions that about 4 of you before I came on air had left on the original post about the coaching call. I'll get to those, and I'll get to each one of them here before we finish. All right. Yeah, Tammy says decision fatigue is a killer. It is. That's really what it is, decision fatigue. Rab says, how do you deal with the occasional sleep disruption, illness, or work overload that can disrupt your habit goals for days or even weeks? It seems to be completely derail the motivation. Also, would love to hear your very quick view on the law of attraction. Okay, well, let's start. When you get disrupted, here's how I look at it. My sleep is my number one health priority. You may differ with this, but I've done a lot of research on it, and here's what I know for sure. When I don't get adequate rest, nothing goes very well. It's hard on my health. It's hard on my focus. It's really hard on my productivity. So, for example, if for some reason I don't get to bed before midnight and I've got a workout planned the next day, I will blow off my workout in order to get enough sleep. Okay? Now, that doesn't happen very often because I'm very disciplined about getting to bed on time. So I rarely miss workouts unless I'm traveling, and that's like a whole other ball of wax. But even that I'm getting more consistent at. So I would say the main thing is be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Get back in the game. I think people that are successful with goal setting are not people, listen to me on this, are not people that never fall down. They're people that refuse not to get up. In other words, you're only out when you quit, when you walk off the field. But if you get up and if you keep running, you're going to have a shot at accomplishing your goal. Law of attraction, I don't think I'm going to comment on that because I don't remember much about it other than I saw that movie years ago. What was that called? Somebody will remember it and put it in here. Somebody says, hello from London, Canada. All righty. Mark's glad to be here from Atlanta. Neil says, hello from Ohio. 9 p.m. in Germany. Awesome. Okay, I'm still looking for questions here. Okay, Sunday, Joe says, one of my goals is to open the residential part of the program for Esther's house by May 31st. We have the farmhouse rented, and now we need to add staff. There are a lot of sub-goals within that big goal. I'm not sure how to apply activation triggers to this. Well, typically there's a point in any goal where we can anticipate that we're going to get stuck. Like maybe it's creating the budget for that. And so maybe that's something you could delegate to somebody on your staff or a volunteer that would be better at that kind of thing. Maybe it's hiring people, and maybe you could hire somebody or create an activation trigger around delegation where somebody else would do the initial screening. That's what we do in our company. We don't do the initial screening, and it eventually gets to us if they pass the initial screening. But there may be some things around that. I don't know if that helps you, Sunday Joe, but that would be my advice. So, Avia says, another mentor I admire, Brendan Burchard, by the way, one of my mentors and a friend, said that SMART system made for companies and business projects, hence not fit for individuals. It lacks of dreams, motivation, emotions, social connections. Look, I love Brendan, but he's wrong. He's just flat out wrong on that. Because here's the deal. I don't care if it's a business goal. That's related to a dream too. It's related to a dream for your business. But a dream that's not smart is going to remain a dream, and it will be elusive. You'll never accomplish it. You've got to reduce it to a goal. So what's your favorite technology automated activation trigger? Well, I use Keyboard Maestro, and I set up for myself activation triggers like, I call this my workday shutdown, and it just shuts down everything except what I'm going to need the next morning. And then I've got a productive day activation trigger or routine in Keyboard Maestro that opens up all the normal programs that I use in the course of a day. Then I've also got a writing environment that I set up, but I use Keyboard Maestro for that because it's just basically one click and bam, it closes the programs I don't need, opens the ones I do need, and gets me set up to win. Dean says, I should make a goal around getting more sleep. I've been trying to focus on it lately, and you're right. When I don't get enough sleep, nothing goes well. Yeah, so Gail and I have been thinking about activation triggers related to that. And one simple one that we're trying right now is simply a reminder that goes off on our phone. And ours goes off at 9 o'clock and tells us to get ready for bed because we want to be in bed by 9:30. Okay? Oh, yeah, The Secret. That's what the book was on the law of attraction. Yeah, I actually loved that movie, and I wished it was as simple as simply kind of hoping that that comes to pass. But I think it takes more work than that. You know, I wish it were true, but I think it's more to it than that. So Tom says, you mentioned building a macro for your quiet time. Do you know how to do this on an iPad? I don't. Sorry. You'd need to get some kind of macro program that would work on the iPad, and I don't know how to do that. Dean says, what do you suggest when your original goals have changed a bit after you initially worked through the buy material? Do you just return to step one? Not necessarily. You don't have to return to step one. What you might return to is session 3 on setting the goals. And there's a lot of options. We'll do an entire coaching session on that this year in one of our monthly coaching calls, where we talk about the options of recommit, revise, remove, or what's the other one? There's a fourth one too, replace. Okay. So those are 4 strategic options when you've got a goal that doesn't quite fit anymore. And so, yeah, I don't hesitate to change the goal or to modify it if it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Okay, Annie says your why is the most important thing when my excitement wanes. Totally. Yeah. The activation trigger will take the decision fatigue out of it and will enable you to overcome sort of that willpower resistance. But still, even when you do that, there's probably going to be a time when you're trying to accomplish the goal when you just don't have the motivation, even if you're using an activation trigger, and that's when you got to connect back with sort of the original idea behind it. Okay, so Brian says, how do you engage your spouse if they're not on the goal-oriented journey you are? And while they're not opposed, maybe it's more of a wiring thing. Okay, this is a big question, and it's certainly one that I've contended with. Let me get my iPad back on. That's one I've contended with because some of you have heard me tell this story, but Gail and I are exact opposites on every possible personality test. So whether it's Myers-Briggs or it's Strength Finders or it's Colby, actually we're a little similar on Colby, Enneagram, all that stuff, we're like exact opposite. Now, that honestly was great when we were first dating because it really attracted me to her because she had things, qualities that I didn't have. And I love that. But those things that attracted us initially became annoyances over time. You know, why can't she be like me? Why can't she do it like I would do it? And you got to push through that. And so what I see now is that because she's so different, that just makes our collective palette of colors by which we're painting this big sketch of life. It gives us more colors to work with. And so I actually love it. Now, having said that, that's the context. Gail is not an achiever. So achiever on Strength Finders is my number one strength. I know most of you are shocked by that. You're really surprised, but it is my number one strength. For Gail, it's actually number 34. So dead last for her. So I kept trying to get her in goal setting and she just wasn't wired that way. What I did was to reframe it for her. And so I first invited her to watch the first video that we ever recorded, which was 4 years ago for Best Year Ever. And I said, look, I get that this is not your thing, but I wonder if you could just watch this with me. And, you know, maybe if it connects with you, maybe you can watch video 2 with me. Well, she stuck with it. She got really jazzed about it. And here's why. Now, all of a sudden, goal setting for her wasn't a way to achieve. It was a way to engage me in some of the most important topics and tasks and dreams of our life. So we had these amazing conversations about what matters most. And I really think that's the beauty of goal setting, is that it enables you, when you do it together, to engage in all these conversations that you wouldn't otherwise do. And so that's why we like goal setting. So I think if you can kind of seduce them in a way into maybe watching the first video or the second one, or just talk about, let's just say it's too late for that, or you tried that and it didn't work, then I would just go to dinner and just talk about what you're learning and make very clear that you don't start inadvertently coaching her or him and making it an well, like you ought to set a goal for that. Don't do that. My experience, 38 years of being married, happily married, don't do that. Don't try to fix your spouse. That usually doesn't work. Here's another one. Bummy says from Saskatoon, Canada, I can't seem to be able to delegate anything in my work as a physician. Am I being overly ambitious by wanting to write songs and sing as well? Well, first of all, I would challenge you about delegating things at work. You should take my Free to Focus course because it will absolutely help you to figure out where you add value and where you need to focus. And I promise you, it's like yesterday I went to the dentist. I know it's a little bit different field. I went to the dentist. Guess what my dentist didn't do? He didn't clean my teeth. Why? Because a hygienist who's probably making, 25% of what he makes, or maybe even less, could do that function. They save him for the really tough stuff, like doing the fillings or attaching veneers or doing other stuff that only the dentist can do. So what is it in your business, in your medical practice, that you and only you can do? And here's why. You don't want to be running yourself ragged. You want to be freed up to do what you're talking about, writing songs and pursuing meaningful hobbies, but you can't do that if you're working all the time. And if you're going to grow your business, you're going to be working all the time unless you can figure out how to delegate. So you might check out Free to Focus and see if that would work. Eddie says, I have difficulty reaching my goal of 3 million in sales because I can't seem to break it down. Can you help me? Okay, this one may be a little bit tough about knowing what your business is, but here's how I would look at it. I would ask myself, I'm just freelancing here, but I would probably say, okay, how many transactions were involved in that $3 million? Were these small transactions? What was the average transaction cost? Or what was the average commission that I made? What would I have to do? What would it take to raise that by 10 or 20%, that average commission price? Are there any strategies that I could employ to raise the average transaction value? Or is there something I do, maybe delegation, maybe automation, that would enable me to do more transactions? You don't have to do like a gazillion more, but what if you could do 20% more transactions? Maybe there's delegation. Maybe some of these transactions could be automated in a certain way. I don't know what it would look like, Eddie, but you might get a friend and have somebody brainstorm with you about how you can increase your volume. Katrina says, do you have any recommendations for paper planners or goal trackers for those of us who prefer to put pen to paper? No, I don't. But I can tell you this. We're in the process, our team is in the process of developing a paper best year ever planner. It's going to be awesome. We're in the process of prototyping it right now. We want it to be the ultimate planner. I tend to do everything digitally. My daughter, Megan, who's our chief operating officer, does everything on paper. And she's got some ideas. We've literally ordered every planner on the market. We've deconstructed it. We're taking the best of the best. And our goal is really to create the ultimate planner. Unfortunately, it's not going to be available till the next year's edition of Best Year Ever. But you might look at, if it were me, I would probably use something like the Franklin Covey planner. That's just something I'm familiar with. James says, I have an ambitious goal this year of starting a business, but I'm still in the beginning stages of figuring out what I can offer that adds the most value. Would you recommend making this a longer term goal and have a shorter term goal around figuring out the value prop? Yeah, absolutely. I think a goal of figuring out the value proposition would be a great near term goal. And once you accomplish that and check it off, and here's a cool thing, you can add more goals. Remember, I always say 7 to 10 goals max. But as you check them off, you can add more goals. You just never want more than 7 to 10 at one time. And let me also recommend to you, James, that you read a book by my friend Pat Flynn called Will It Fly? It's one of the most helpful books on figuring out whether or not your product idea or your business idea is viable. Brooke says, I'm trying to start a business instead of getting a job. I feel overwhelmed and don't know if it's delusional to think I can be up and running in 3 months. I have one client, but don't even have pricing for the work, no business plan or model. Am I overthinking? Yeah, you might be overthinking it. What I would think of, and I got to show you this book, by the way. I'm reading this book right now. I actually just finished it this last week called Designing Your Life. And this is a book that was written by 2 former Apple engineers, product designers at Apple, who are now professors at Stanford University. And they talk about design thinking. And they said you need to approach your life as a designer. And designers have 5 different mindsets that they follow. And one mindset is they just try stuff. In other words, they don't get all wedded to the perfect plan. And that's what a lot of times people do when they're starting out in a business. They create this elaborate business plan. And instead, what they need to do, according to the authors of this book, again, Designing Your Life is the book, what they do is they say, just try some stuff. Build a prototype and see if it works. And if it doesn't, recalibrate, build another prototype and see if that works. So I would look at this one client that you have as your prototype and use some prototype the pricing. It doesn't mean you can't change it later. I almost never get the pricing right initially. I'm either too high or I'm too low, but you'll never figure it out in the ivory tower. You've got to get out there on the field and actually interact with real live clients. So I think if you just break it down like that and get in the game and moving forward, get referrals from that client as you add value and begin to build your business from there. Yeah, I think, Dan, I answered this question. How do you stay motivated if your spouse is not into goals? You probably need somebody else in your life that's not your spouse that can be kind of your accountability partner. And by accountability partner, I mean someone who has your same kind of mindset. They want to grow as a person. They want to grow in their business. They're willing to inspire you and encourage you, make you believe the best about yourself, give you honest feedback when you ask for it, but yeah, hold you accountable when you need it as well. Ellen says, how do you set an activation trigger for a goal that the time changes when you take the next step changes daily? You're going to have to make the activation trigger independent of the time. It's best if you can do it with time, but it could be something else. Like it might be, let's just say that you've got a job where you come home at all different hours of the day. And one of the things you want to do is that you want to be fully present to your family. So maybe the activation trigger for you is I'm making this up, but maybe you just hang a sign in the garage that the first thing you see when you open that door is be fully present with my family. It reminds you of what this goal is, even though it's going to change anytime during the day, but it's something that precedes the activation of the habit, hence an activation trigger. Any ideas on activation triggers for the habit of checking email 10 times daily? Yeah, or less than 10 times daily. An activation trigger there, and this may not be enough, but it may be enough. One, and this is an automation one, or actually elimination, shut down your email program. Okay, so that, my guess, is not going to work because you're going to cheat. You're going to reload that email program and you're going to be right back in the soup. But here's something you can do. There's an application called Freedom. Okay, so just Google it. It's an app, Freedom, the app. I think it might be freedom.to. Somebody can double check me on that as I'm talking. But the thing about this app is it will shut off parts of the internet that are a threat to your productivity, and you can do it on a case-by-case basis, and it works on all your devices, works on Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, anything. But here's the thing about it. You can set the time. You can say, okay, for the next hour, I got to be focused on this project. And I don't want to be checking email. So what do? In Freedom, you say, shut off email. So you can get no incoming email. You can't send out any email. You can turn off Slack. You can turn off parts of the web. As a writer, I can't turn off the entire internet. I got to be able to do research, but I don't need Facebook. I don't need Twitter. I probably don't need YouTube. And so those are part of the sequence that I've used in the past with Freedom to turn off those parts of it. So that would be an automation activation trigger because you're using something that automates the process. Hope that makes sense. Brian says, thank you answering. Solid gold. Great. Dan says, great answer. Great advice about marriage, says Judy. Alan says, so if you do see areas that your wife does need fixing, as in you see areas that could move forward on, but their fear holds them back, suggestions for helping her without coaching her. Can I just talk to myself for a minute? Because I contend, because I'm a coach, wrong side. That's what I do just naturally is I coach. And doesn't work so well with family members because oftentimes what they want to do is be heard. And sometimes empathy is the solution that people need. And there's usually a story behind the story. And if they can just talk it out, if they can take whatever it is they're afraid of and they can get it out there, it's usually a lot smaller and less scary than it is inside of their head. So one of the best things you can do in your marriage is just let your spouse talk. Just be curious, ask questions, ask the question behind the question. Don't just ask a question and use that as a pretense for preaching a sermon to them, but ask the question and really be curious. and nod and say things like, that's got to be hard, or I have no idea what that must be like. That's incredible. And, and then ask, how can I support you? Usually people know, right? They have the wisdom inside of them. They know the answer. They could coach themselves, but they need somebody that can come alongside and basically convince them that they're not alone. That's just a huge, huge help. Okay, Lori says, until Michael's is out, I recommend Passion Planner. I've heard good things about that too. Dean says, a key tip for me that you covered is to not overthink things and take action. I'm working on a career transition goal, and I'm surprised how many responses I've been getting just by taking that next step instead of waiting to get my resume perfect. It's encouraging and has provided me additional motivation. Yeah, while your competition is polishing their resume, get out and talk to people and get the job. It's so true. And all of us tend to overthink. But here's the problem. It's a fancy way of procrastinating. It keeps us from achieving our goals, so don't overthink it. Kelsey says the Desire Map Planner. Yeah, that would totally be worth looking at. Okay, guys, here's what I'm going to do because we've got about 42 minutes. We've into this 42 minutes, and I want to make sure that I get to the questions that some of you submitted via the web. And so I'm just going to refresh this page here and make sure that I've got it. But Mark Singleton asked, how many goals should you have? Specifically, I am on a work project that is not what I want to do, and one of my goals is to further develop myself into a market leader in business process improvement. I have to continue with the work I am doing because it pays the bills, but I want to convert over to my dream job. How do you best approach this situation? As I say in the course, Session 3, you should have no more than 7 to 10 goals, because if you do, you're going to lose focus, you're going to feel overwhelmed, and you're not going to accomplish anything. And those students who have been with us year after year, our alumni, will tell you that that's the biggest thing that derails them is when they set too many goals. They begin to feel overwhelmed, they lose focus, they throw up their hands, and they don't accomplish anything. So don't do that. But I think the distinction between a project and a goal will be helping you. You're going to have probably hundreds of projects this year that are not goals. I have a project of cleaning out my garage. Is that a goal? No. I mean, does it get me excited? None of it. I mean, it's just a project. I'm not going to put that on my goal sheet. I reserve what's my goal is for those things that are sort of what the writers of the 4 disciplines of execution call things that are outside the whirlwind of my life. There's a whole lot of stuff you have to do just to maintain your life and your work. Those are kind of inside the whirlwind. The kind of goals we're talking a bit about are outside of the whirlwind. They're not part of your normal process. They're not part of business or life as usual. And that's why if you try to do too many of those while you're servicing the rest of your life or your work, you're going to feel overwhelmed. So that goal that's related to your project or to your work, I would just call it a project, not a goal. I mean, if your boss wants you to call it a goal, call it a goal. But in your own vernacular, you're thinking of that as a project, not one of your 7 to 10 goals that are going to make this year your best year ever. I mean, honestly, if you accomplish that goal at work that you're not excited about, will it contribute to making this your best year ever? Probably not. You need to do it. I get that. But it's not going to contribute to making this your best year ever. It's not going to be a breakthrough result. Mark, I hope that's helpful. Natalie asked one question about NOSBI. I have set up a few recurring tasks for my rituals. Any ideas on how to get my subtasks to show up unchecked without manually unchecking them? Okay, this is a little bit technical, but Natalie, no, I've not figured that out because in my morning routine, I have those subtasks too, and I have to uncheck them every morning. And I've talked to the creators of NOSBI about resetting that every time a new one, but so far, that's not the case. So you just have to kind of go through the manual thing of doing that each time. Sherry asked, I think I've made too many goals, and instead of balance, I'm experiencing chaos and doubt. See, this is what I said earlier, guys, that when you've got too many goals, that's what you're going to experience. Sherry, here's the thing you need to know. That's normal. That's how you should feel when you've got too many goals. She says, I continue to use my meditation practices to calm and take baby steps. What other tools or techniques are beneficial? The most important tool that I could give you is cut the number of goals. Once you accomplish your 7 to 10 goals or begin to accomplish some of them, you can add new ones in. But here's what I focus on. I take my 7 to 10 goals, and we talked about this at Best Year Ever Live. I wish you guys could be there. Many of you were that are on this session today. But one of the things we talked about is having no more than 2, at the absolute most, 3 goals that you focus on each quarter. That will keep you from being overwhelmed. And that's an insight I got, again, from reading the 4 disciplines of execution. Adam said, how do you balance out the drive to achieve future goals with the desire to slow down and live a simpler, healthier, more connected life? This is a great question, because you might be tempted to think that people who are high achievers can't turn it off, don't want to turn it off. They're always driving over the speed limit. They're always going 100 miles an hour. They no sooner finish one project than they gin up another one. And my life was like that for years, until I started seeing the value of freedom and of margin. And I got overwhelmed. And I just came through a series of crashes to realize that living without margin is not fun. It's not fun financially when you don't have enough money to meet your obligations or do the things you want to do, but it's especially not fun when it comes to time. And so one huge value for me is freedom. A lot of people think, well, I'll just start my own business so I can be more free. Look, I don't know of a worse boss to work for than yourself. And a lot of you that are self-employed or own your own business will attest to the fact, and say amen in the comments if you agree with this, that your boss, if you're self-employed, is a tyrant. You know, he's always got more stuff for you to do. He never wants you to leave the office on time. If it were up to him, he would have you working there 24 hours a day. And I'm talking about you. You know who you are. And I used to be like that too. So what I did is I started setting goals around my freedom. So for example, when I left Thomas Nelson Publishers in 2011, I wasn't very good about taking vacations, and I only took them at a week at a time. So I said to myself, I'm going to start taking a 1-month sabbatical every year. Now get this. Some of you are rolling your eyes. I can see them from here. Some of you are thinking, there's no way I could possibly do that. I said this to my doctor last year, and she said, there's no way I can do that. And I said, look, trust me, set the goal, be serious about it, figure out your why. Don't try to answer how until you have the what and the why. Guess what? She didn't go for a month, but she went to Italy for 2 weeks last year. And she just told me, because I was just in to see her, she said that was like one of the most amazing experiences she's ever had in her life. So Gail and I set this goal. It was on my goal list of having a 1-month sabbatical. Now I'm starting a new business. How in the heck am I going to be able to do that? Here's what I did. I said, how could I build a business that would allow me to be free to take a sabbatical for 1 month every year? And I've been able to do that every year for 6 years, with the exception of 1 year. And last year, we broke it up. So we didn't do one continuous month. This year, we're doing August. We're taking that entire month off. Then I said, okay, how can I create a business that doesn't require me to work on the weekends? Now, sometimes when we're doing a launch, there's going to be some weekend work, but that's very infrequent. We really believe and encourage our employees to practice a 40-hour work week. Why? Because we want freedom. So you've got to set goals for this kind of stuff. So now I have this goal. This is a habit goal on my current list for 2017, because I drifted into a bad habit last year of leaving the office every day at 6. And my activation trigger, apropos to our topic today, was to have the lights automatically, they're on an automatic timer, they automatically go off at 6. So here I am working in the dark after 6 if I want to continue to work. But that's an activation trigger. It's actually a physical trigger that lets me know the day's over. I got bigger fish to fry, because I want to be connected with Gail. I want to be able to pursue my hobbies. I want to be able to read. I want to do non-work related things. So Adam, I hope that answered your question. Still got a few minutes left, so let me just see here what we've got in terms of other questions. Chad says, as a livestock farmer, there's no way I can do a month off. Okay, Chad, here's a question I want to ask you. Now, I'm glad you raised this. That may be true. It may be true. There are some problems that the writers of this book call gravity problems, which would be a problem that you just can't change. You know, like the law of gravity. You know, for me, if I said, you know what, I can't play professional basketball because I'm not 6 feet tall, and oh, by the way, I have zero talent for playing basketball and I have no experience. That's kind of a gravity problem. You know, that would not be possible. That wouldn't make sense for me to even try. But before you concede that it's a gravity problem, I would do a little brainstorming and ask yourself if it's a limiting belief. Go back to session 1, but I would suggest that that's probably a limiting belief. Maybe you don't have the staff to be able to do that yet. Maybe you're not making enough money to hire the staff to be able to do that yet. But listen to me, Chad, this is really important. None of those strategies are going to show up until you get clear on what you want. If you start with how, you will short circuit the goal every single time. You've got to suspend the how. Don't even think about it. Okay? Don't allow yourself to entertain the how until you get clear on what you want, and then connect with your why. Why would that be important? Why might it be important for you to take a month off? And by the way, I'm not even saying that's the right goal. Maybe it ought to be 3 months. Maybe it ought to be a week every quarter. I don't know this is your life. You gotta figure it out for yourself. But I would not succumb to the temptation to just automatically go to the default of a limiting belief on that. So sorry, I hope I'm not too hard on you, but I've got a knack for recognizing limiting beliefs when they show up. Veronica says, my husband is self-employed, and last year he went to New Zealand for 4 weeks with 2 children, 3 plus 5, and it was the best experience ever. Cool. My daughter, Madeline, she may be on this call, I don't know, but she and her husband, Sean, decided last year that they wanted to see the U.S., so they bought an Airstream trailer, and Madeline works for me, so she does social media. She can work from anywhere. Sean is a computer consultant, used to be with Apple, and he can work from anywhere, so they just took to the road. And there's a lot of people that are that age that say there's no way I can do that. I've got a job. Well, what if you had a different job? There's a lot of possibilities. Don't succumb to the limiting belief too quickly. Adam, any advice for those with young children who have only a few hours of margin per day? Well, that is reality, isn't it? I mean, that is kind of a gravity problem. I think you just got to be intentional about the hours you do have. And what I've seen too often is that people with young children kind of throw up their hands and say, because I don't have that much margin, I'm not going to be intentional with the margin I have. And they end up vegging or just drifting and not using the time that they do have. One of the things you can also do is tag team with your spouse or tag team with some friends so that you get some time to get a little additional margin into your life. Chad says, thanks. Bill says, do you journal each day to feel good about your progress and whatever lessons you are learning? Yes, I do. The last thing I do in my quiet time every morning is I journal. And I journal using a series of questions that I've written about in my blog, and maybe Blair or somebody else from my team can search my blog for that. But it's how I got consistent in journaling, by asking myself a series of questions. And one of them is, what are my 3 biggest wins from yesterday? Now, I kind of do this as a double whammy, because the last thing Gail and I do at night before we drift off to sleep, we get in bed, we pray together, and then we ask each other, what were your 3 wins from today? And then I record those the next day. The reason I do that is because if you're not careful, you start noticing what's missing and where you failed. And that doesn't help your confidence, and it gives you no sense of momentum. So what I do in the morning, last thing at night, so I can remind myself and be grateful for the wins that I had. First thing in the morning, or almost first thing in the morning, I'm writing down the wins from the day before so that I can build my confidence and realize that I actually am gaining momentum. Katrina says, we're almost out of time, but not quite. I would love to hear your advice for people who work in very negative work environments. How can we overcome the complaining negativity? I have been avoiding my colleagues, but that doesn't allow for meaningful collaboration. Yeah, it really doesn't. And I know how that can be because I've been in those kinds of work environments before. I think you got 2 choices. Either one, you come to the conclusion that you can affect the outcome or change the environment, or you can't. Now, I would not make a decision to leave initially unless I just was getting nowhere with trying to affect the environment. There was one company I worked at that was very negative, and unfortunately, it was coming from the top down. It was coming from the boss. People complained. They complained about him. They complained about the work. I mean, it was one negative thing after another. I decided that I hated that, and I was going to do that. So I decided, and by the way, it's not because I was virtuous. It was just because I was intentional. I decided I'm not going to complain. I'm going to find things to notice that are working, that are positive, that are constructive. And so I would be sort of the voice of positivity. I wasn't Pollyanna. I acknowledged problems when they were there, but I saw them as opportunities. And so at first, a lot didn't happen. But I was the director of a department, And I was able to change the people under me. You know, we began to create this sort of subculture within the larger culture. And then that culture became, as my responsibility expanded, I had more influence. And before long, we kind of took over the company. Not 100%, but eventually almost everybody in the company had changed their perspective. And it was a much more, not perfect, but much more positive environment to work in. Now, there's some environments where maybe you don't have that level of influence, or maybe it's just too big, or it's too entrenched, and then you're going to have to make a decision. Are you going to allow yourself to remain in that toxic environment? Because eventually, it's going to affect you. It's like the Bible says, bad company corrupts good morals. And if you hang out with the wrong kind of people, you're going to become like them. You become like the people you hang out with. I mean, it's just inevitable. And maybe you just can't up and quit your job, but maybe you can set a goal to begin to transition out of that so that you put yourself in a position 12 months from now or 24 months from now or whatever it is, so that you really could leave and you could be in an environment that's positive and healthy for you. Okay, so Adam says, and this is going to be the last question. Oh, Rick says, do you journal in digital or analog format? I'll tell you what I do. I do it digitally, and I do it in an application called Day One. It's a Mac-only application, I think. Absolutely love it. But the tool's really not as important as it is to know what works best for you. So if you're the kind of person like my wife that likes to write out by longhand, do that. The best tool is the one that you use. Okay, so last question here is from Tammy. Oh, nope, I'm not going to get that one. Let me see here. Actually, I think that may be the last question, at least that I'm seeing. I know there's a slight delay. Guys, thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. This is an experiment, another prototype, if you will, of how to do these coaching calls inside of the Best Year Ever VIP group. Thank you guys for being students. I think this live format's going to work. We'll do it next month. I'm not setting these in advance. I'm just trying to find a time when I can do it. I'm trying to do it always at 2 p.m. so that our friends in Australia and our friends in England, where our second and third biggest concentration of students, can also attend live, although the hour is a little crazy for them. But we'll try to do it at 2 p.m. We'll do it toward the middle of the month. But even if you can't attend live, you'll be able to watch the recording. You watch in just a few minutes. This is going to pop up as a recording for you in your Facebook feed. So thank you so much for coming. If you have additional questions or additional comments, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to answer as many of those as I can. So until next month, awesome.